Hey guys, and welcome to this new video. So this is going to be a little bit of a different video for me. I'm going to be talking about my 3D printer and some recent mods I made to it that have vastly improved my quality of life. So I said that this is going to be a little bit of a different video for me. And that is that I'm actually going to be talking about my 3D printer. So I utilize my 3D printer lots for almost all the projects that you can find on my channel, but I very rarely actually talk about the machine itself or my printing setup or how I use it at all, really. And the reason for that is that I don't really think of myself as any kind of expert in 3D printing. I don't even really think of myself as, a 3D printing hobbyist or enthusiast, really. For me, I mostly view the 3D printer as a tool. That is, it's a means to an end to achieve something. Now, I also don't mean that to sound in any way condescending towards the people whose like main hobby really is 3D printing. I think it's an incredible hobby and it's an incredible machine, but for me, I generally just think of it as a means to an end. But that said, it's not hyperbole for me to say that owning a 3D printer has literally changed my life in so many ways and unlocked possibilities for making things that I never really thought that I would be able to make. So, while I do view it as a tool, it probably is still one of the most important tools that I've ever owned. Even being the most important tool, probably the most important tool that I own, I've never actually done anything with my 3D printer. So I have an Ender3 V2, and up until recently, it's pretty much just been used as stock. So no real changes made. I think the only thing I made originally, modification-wise, was I took the spool holder off the top and set up a side-mounted spool holder to help prevent the weight of the spool from making the gantry or the Z-axis shake around too much. But aside from that, I'd never actually done any modifications to it. Despite the fact that when I unboxed the printer originally and first started using it, there were kind of two things that initially struck me that I found really, really irritating. And up until now, I've pretty much just lived with them for the entire time that I've had the printer. And I've been able to get, pretty good prints out of it over the time that I've had it. But recently I installed a few different modifications that have just, I've really just been blown away with how good they are. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to talk about what those mods were, and also a couple of my little tips and stuff that I found with printing that I tend to use all the time and seem to get pretty damn good results out of it. I mentioned a second ago that when I first unboxed my Ender3 V2, there were a couple of things that kind of immediately struck me and that I was kind of surprised at and I didn't really like. So the first one is basically the Z-axis and the lead screw. So I was kind of firstly surprised that it was driven on a single side. As I've gotten more into 3D printing and into understanding about the machines and their various different designs, it's become apparent to me that you don't necessarily always need the two lead screws, really, depending on the design and how it works, because there isn't a huge amount of physical load on the gantry itself. But still, having one just felt a little bit, kind of cheap, or like they were just, optimizing for price rather than performance, which is pretty true. I mean, that's kind of the Ender brand. Is a lot of it is about decent quality for budget, so you can't expect all the bells and whistles. But one thing that really struck me was that the lead screw just flops around on the base Ender 3 and Ender 3 V2. They don't provide a top bearing guide for the Z-axis lead screw, which just really surprised me that it just waffles around. So that was one of the very first ever mods I did ages ago. Was I 3D printed a little support bracket that would sort of capture the top of the Z-axis lead screw and hold it in place. So with that said, I think it's obvious what one of my first mods that I wanted to do to it was, and that was I wanted to add dual Z-axis lead screws. So the kit that I bought for the dual Z-axis lead screws also came with two captive bearing carriers for the tops of the lead screws. So it comes with one for the new second lead screw, and it also comes with a second one which you can stick onto your existing lead screw that came with the machine. As I mentioned, the Z-axis lead screw, the extra one, really only kind of makes much of a difference if you were to add extra weight onto your gantry. So with that said, that brings me to my second modification, which is I added a direct drive style extruder to my Ender3. So with this kit is a pretty simple one. All it does, basically you disassemble the whole extruder that comes stock with your Ender3 V2, and pretty much the kit is just a set of brackets that you mount onto your hot end area, where it's mounted onto the gantry, and pretty much you bolt your stepper motor, your extruder stepper motor onto there, and that's more or less it, mechanically anyway. One thing you can do with this, when you change from a boat and tube extruder to a direct drive extruder, you may need to modify your retraction settings a little bit. So that is during travel moves, how much the extruder retracts your filament so that you don't end up with stringing and that kind of thing happening. This brings me to, I think, what is the best quality of life improvement that I've done to the printer. I think everyone should do this modification, and I think it also should just be stock on every 3D printer, and is now, to be fair, stock on a lot of 3D printers. That is adding the BL Touch for automatic bed leveling or mesh bed leveling, and this is really just such a game changer for me. So when I first started 3D printing, and I was reading all the instruction manuals on how to get set up and do your first prints, and when I saw the leveling procedure described, and I watched videos on people talking about this, I was just stunned at how ridiculous it seemed. And then even just going through the printer's hardware itself and doing it myself, interacting with the printer by these 4 little leveling wheels on the bottom of the print bed, just, I don't know, there's just something about it that just feels like there is a better way to do this. There needs to be a better way to do this. And it was one of the first things I ever Googled was, is there a printer that has automatic bed leveling? To which I was found that yes, there are some printers that can do fully automatic, genuine automatic bed leveling, but that one of the most common ways to get a pretty repeatable and somewhat automatic bed leveling is to use a BL Touch, or a bed probe, a mesh bed leveling mesh probe. So that was something that's been on my list for basically since day one, to get one of these and set it up. But I was just dragging my heels on doing it. So now that I have it set up, it's as good as it really sounds. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'm getting some of the most repeatable first layers that I've ever had in any prints. Like, it's just, it's an absolute dream. Turn it on, not worried about first layer adhesion or anything like that. Have it set up really crisp, really fine detail on that, and it's just fantastic, really. One thing I will definitely recommend, though, to go alongside your BL Touch, and even if you don't have a BL Touch, even if you are doing just manual bed leveling with a piece of paper, and that is swap your piece of paper for one of these little feeler gauges. So they usually come in a set of like sort of a sandwiched little set with all loads of different sizes in there. I took this one out of the set. It's my 0.2 millimeter feeler gauge, and this is just, this is also a real game changer if you're still doing manual bed leveling, and even if you have your BL Touch and you want to set your really fine offsets and stuff like that, this is, I think, is absolutely fantastic tool to have. It's repeatable, it's consistent, it won't, because even with just sheets of printer paper, they're not consistent thicknesses, and also if you clamp down on them, you can pull them in different ways and stuff, and they'll have different levels of friction. This little guy pretty much always consistent. And so we're brought to my final mod for the moment, and that is these little squidgy rubber feet that I came up with. So I'd heard of the idea of using squash balls to make and adding little cups to the bottom to hold your printer and to make kind of vibration isolating feet for it. Oddly enough, squash balls are kind of expensive, so I found these little cat toys on Amazon that were dirt cheap and almost about the same size as a squash ball. In fact, about 4 centimeters or so across, or 38 millimeters, um, and they seem to be just about the right amount of kind of squidginess and also firmness to not just completely smush under the weight of the printer. So I designed these little cup feet for them, and I have to say this was the one that, of all the mods, that I was like least certain would it make any kind of difference, and I cannot understate just how shocked I am at the difference that these little squidgy feet balls make. I had seen a video recently enough about isolating feet for 3D printers, and that they can make a substantial difference to print quality. So that was what gave me the idea to try this out. And yeah, I can honestly say it at least changes the whole volume dynamic of the printers. Just cut out any of that vibration from the table, anything like that. Also, a quick note on nozzle sizes. So we're going to have a look at a couple of benchies that I printed recently, one before all the mods and one since all the mods, just so we can take a look at kind of some quality improvements that I think those mods have immediately added to the printer. So I want to keep in mind when you're looking at them that they're not the highest quality benchies in the world, but they're also printed on a 0.8 millimeter nozzle, which is my kind of standard nozzle size that I use. Again, I don't tend to strive for the most high fidelity possible in my prints. One of those ways, it's a cheap way of me saying that I'm not much of an expert in stuff, because I don't really care about the super fine quality of my printer. Mostly just because of what I use it for, the kind of parts that I want out of it. I don't tend to need hugely accurate fine details, and most of the time I'm not really don't really have a problem with prints not looking amazing, or also with prints needing a little bit of post-processing and some cleanup, especially on some areas where there might be critical dimensions. So yeah, I tend to use the 0.8 millimeter nozzle just because of the increase in speed that I can get with printing with that nozzle. I also tend to print fairly high levels of millimeters per second. My base is usually about 100 millimeters per second that I use. Sometimes I go down to 80, which is pretty fast. So don't always get the highest quality out of it, but I think that's a trade-off that I decided I was willing to make. And you can see like the differences between different nozzles, the nozzle diameters, that the throughput of them is just way different. You can go up to a 1 millimeter nozzle and you can have massive throughput through that, and you can print quite high speed, but obviously you're just going to sacrifice quality with it. I find the 0.8 millimeter nozzle is enough that I still can get pretty decent quality for the size of things that I like to print, or that I'm generally printing, and that I also get pretty good speeds with that. Alright, so throughout this entire video you've seen this 3D benchy being printed, and I mentioned earlier that we were going to have a look at this, and we're going to compare and contrast the quality of this benchy with this one. So basically these are two benchies printed off of my printer. This one is with all the mods that I've just been discussing in this video. This one is before any of those mods. So the differences and the similarities between them, they're both using the same 0.8 millimeter nozzle, and they're both using the same brand of filament. So they're different colored filaments, but it is the same filament. Both just a standard PLA as well. So firstly, they're not super fine benchies. They're not not amazing. You have to keep in mind they're printed with a 0.8 millimeter nozzle, so not the most fine accuracy, and also they're printed quite fast, pretty high millimeters per second on them. So I wouldn't expect great things from them, but in my opinion they're pretty decent benchies for all things considered. This one, with all those mods, a hell of a lot better than this one. So let's have a look, go through them, and see what the differences are. So let's have a look at the bottoms first. So in the old one, it's not really very good. The lettering's all pretty messed up. It's not super smooth, and there's also a fair amount of squish in the bottom. So there's a bit of a lip there, and there's some elephant's footing going on, so it's not super fine. On the newer setup, it's a lot better. So the lettering is much more crisp, and also that squish is pretty much gone. There's a tiny bit there. I think it's maybe I have it calibrated a little too close to the bed, but I always struggled with bed leveling, manual bed leveling anyway. Not super good at it, mostly because I'm pretty impatient. But yeah, I think if I can get this tuned in nicely, so it's pretty good already, but if I can get it tuned in really nicely, then it'll be great, because it should be pretty damn repeatable with the BL Touch. So moving on, let's have a look at the back here. So this is where you can see some of the big differences. So on the little exhaust port between these two, on the old one, you've got loads of little artifacts in here, which is just, yeah, it's really not very good at all. On this one, it's a hell of a lot finer. So you don't have any of that, any of the same kind of, I think these are caused by extrusion issues. You don't have any of that. It's much, much, much smoother. You can also see the lettering on the back, which, because of the, this width of nozzle, you're not really going to be able to get that coming through cleanly anyway, but it's a lot smoother than what is here. This just looks like an absolute mess, and you can see it's even spilled out over the sides there, and just created a big mess, whereas that is a hell of a lot finer, so that's pretty good. As we spin around to the side, they both look pretty good. There's not a lot of difference between them. You maybe see some of the layer lines are a little bit smoother on this one than on this one. There's some pitting in here. I can run my nail on that. I can feel that. Whereas on this one, it feels a lot smoother. I'm also aware that for looking at those details, the colors do make it more difficult, because the black is kind of harder to see some of the lines than the blue is. So, but you have to take my word for it. This one does feel a lot smoother. So if we look then at the bow, we're going to see quite a bit of difference there. So this is the kind of the overhang bit of the model. So on the old one, that's it's pretty crunchy. That's really bad. On the new one, still not great, but it's a lot smoother, and there's a lot less mess there, really. So then if we flip it around, you can also see where the artifacts of that have carried along the side. On this one, doesn't have them. So both sides are pretty much equally as smooth, as far as I can tell by running my nail along it. This side and that side is definitely not the case for that one. One part actually that's surprising, that I actually kind of think this one is a little better for, is the start and end line along here seems a little bit more consistent. This one is a little bit messier, which I'm not super happy with. I'm not really certain why that's happened, but it could just be this print. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Not sure. But anyway, yeah, overall, the surface finish is better on this one than this one. So maybe I shouldn't dig too much into that. But yeah, I'm not certain why that is the way it is. But all right. So moving on. What else did I spot? Oh yeah. So the portholes as well. They're much the same. There's not a huge amount of difference between them, except for maybe some of the. So if you look straight on, you can see some of like the artifacts of the portholes themselves across the very tip of the bow there. On this, you can't really see them as much, so I think that's a little bit better. It's a little bit smoother if I run my nail on that. Now I'm not certain if that's something to do with, like, I think these like ghosting effects that you get from artifacts, I think can be caused by ringing. Not really certain on that, but if the rubber feet have helped anything, it may have helped that, so that's pretty good. Aside from that, I think these two, most of the rest of everything else is pretty similar on them. Overall, this does have a better surface finish for most parts of it, which is kind of as I expected. Chimneys are mostly the same, and then kind of the surface finishes, yeah, they're all roughly the same. This one has some slightly better surface finishes in here on the decks of the Benchy, I think. Yeah, especially in there, actually, it does. Which is probably helped by more even extrusion, because of the dark drive extruder. So that's pretty cool. So all in all, I think the improvements are worth it. I seem to have gotten better quality out of my new Benchy than my old Benchy, which is good. I also have gotten some quality of life improvements. The BL Touch makes it just so much easier to deal with the printer, and also the little rubber feet provide what is a huge amount of difference in terms of the volume of the printer while it's running. So it runs quite a bit quieter. It is a pretty quiet printer to start with, but the little rubber feet really do make a difference. The loudest thing on that printer is now the fans, which, oh, who knows, maybe I'm going to get some Noctua fans soon, but maybe I'll save some money for now and not do any more mods to the printer for a while. Yeah, so I think that's about it for this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope if there's any 3D printing experts out there who watch this and are cringing at how off the mark I am with all of my assessments, please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to learn something from someone who knows more than me. But yeah, if you did enjoy it, hit that like button, share, subscribe to the channel. Yeah, and if you want to support the work that I'm doing, you can find a link in the description to my Patreon. So yeah, go and leave it there. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.